The violin sang above the sound of clinking glasses, a shimmering thread of music stretching across the grand monarch ballroom. Everything glowed, the chandelier, the polished marble, the laughter that sounded just a bit too perfect. The kind of laughter that fills a room when everyone wants to be seen happy, not to be happy at all. I stood at the edge of it, watching them move under the golden light like a scene I had once belonged to but was now only allowed to haunt. My reflection trembled in the glass doors. For a second, I could almost see the girl I used to be, polite, quiet, eager to be loved, before the night they turned the lock behind me, but I was not her anymore. I took one step forward. The air changed. Heads turned the way they do when a wrong note interrupts a symphony. Every eye in that glittering room found me. Some blinked in surprise, others in disgust, most in confusion. My name traveled in whispers before anyone dared to say it out loud. Willa Robbins, the name they had erased. The music stuttered and stopped. A few waiters froze mid-step. My mother's voice was the first to cut through the silence. "Why is she here?" Her tone could have sliced glass. For a moment, no one answered her. Celeste, my younger sister, stood at the center of the ballroom, her engagement gown like a beam of ivory light. Diamonds sparkled at her throat. She looked perfect, and she knew it. When her gaze met mine, her smile tightened. Adam Keller, the groom-to-be, turned slowly beside her. His expression flickered between recognition and disbelief. "Willa," he said quietly, almost a whisper. I smiled. "You remember me, I'm touched." My mother, Margaret Robbins, straightened like a blade. "This is a private event," she said, her voice clipped, each word measured. "You were not invited." "No," I said, "but I thought family didn't need invitations." Laughter fluttered somewhere in the crowd, thin and nervous. I could feel their eyes scanning my dress, simple black silk, no jewelry, nothing designer. I didn't sparkle the way they did, but I wasn't there to dazzle anyone. I was there because after 9 years, someone had to break the silence. Celeste took a step closer, heels clicking sharp against marble. "You've got some nerve showing up here," she said. "After everything." "Everything?" I repeated. "You mean after being erased?" Her smile grew colder. "You chose to leave, Willa. Don't twist history." I almost laughed. "You should tell that to the snow that buried me the night you watched from the window." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Behind her, my father stood at the bar, pretending to be occupied with his drink. Gregory Robbins, surgeon, philanthropist, liar. He didn't look up. He never did when things got uncomfortable. For a second, I wondered if he would acknowledge me at all. Then I realized he already had by refusing to. I could have walked away right then. I could have saved myself the scene, but I didn't come for peace. I came for the truth. I walked further in, the click of my heels echoing through the quiet hall. "Relax," I said lightly. "I'm not here to ruin your perfect evening. I only came to return something that belongs to you." Celeste frowned. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small black envelope, sealed with red wax. I placed it on the edge of the dessert table beside the engagement cake, white gold, 6 layers tall. "Consider it a gift," I said. Adam hesitated. "What's in it?" "Read it." He looked at Celeste. She nodded stiffly, then tried to snatch it from my hand, but I pulled back. "Let him open it," I said, calm but firm. The crowd leaned closer, drawn like moths to a spark. I could almost hear their collective heartbeat when Adam broke the seal. He scanned the papers inside, and the color drained from his face. "What is this?" he whispered. Celeste's voice cracked. "She's lying, Adam. Whatever's in there, it's fake." I tilted my head, pretending to think. "Fake? That's a funny word coming from you." The room buzzed with low murmurs. Someone in the back whispered my name again, as if confirming to a friend that yes, the lost daughter really existed. I could see journalists, socialites, investors, people my parents had built their image around, trying to decide whether to keep smiling or to watch the show. My mother's composure was cracking. "Enough," she said, stepping forward. "You have no right to be here. Whatever grudge you hold against us ends now." I looked at her carefully. Her hair was the same shade of honey blonde as it had been the day she threw me out. Her eyes were still the same pale blue and still just as empty. "Ends now?" I repeated. "Funny, that's exactly what you said when you kicked me out." Something flickered in her eyes, not guilt, never guilt, but a recognition she couldn't hide. The air around me felt electric, thick with tension. I could almost taste the fear under their perfume. And yet, beneath all the anger, I felt something else rising, not hatred, not revenge, but clarity. The kind that comes when you've waited too long for someone else to speak the truth and finally realize you'll have to do it yourself. I looked around the room at the faces that once belonged to my world, teachers, family friends, old colleagues of my parents, so many smiles built on lies. Then I met Adam's eyes again. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost who knew his secrets. Maybe he was, Don't worry, I said quietly. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I paused, then added, at least not without reason. A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. Celeste's voice rose, brittle and shrill. You think this is funny? You barge in on my engagement party, wave some papers, and expect anyone to take you seriously? You're pathetic, Willa, you always were. I smiled, not cruelly, but the way someone smiles when they've already won. Maybe, I said softly, but the thing about being pathetic is that you can only go up from there. The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. Even the chandelier lights seemed to dim a little. I took a slow breath, then said, You wanted a performance tonight, Celeste. I promise you'll get one. Then I turned away, letting the crowd buzz like a hive waking up, and walked toward the center of the room, the place where I used to imagine dancing when I was a child, before I learned that fairy tales were just contracts with better lighting. The first act was about to begin. The center of the ballroom felt colder than the edges, as if all that light could not reach where I stood. The chandeliers above shimmered like frozen tears, and in their reflection I could see the crowd surrounding me, curious, horrified, entertained. Someone whispered, She's back, and another replied, After all these years. The words rippled through the air like wind through glass. I looked at my sister again. Celeste still held her perfect posture, but her fingers betrayed her. They trembled as she clutched the side of her dress. You've made your point, she hissed. Now leave before security drags you out. Point. I said, You think I came here for a scene? I came because you and I both know what this family built isn't real. She stepped closer. I could smell the expensive perfume my mother always wore, the same scent that used to linger on the coats they wrapped around her and never around me. You're jealous, she whispered. That's all this is. You can't stand that I got the life you lost. I almost pitied her. Jealousy fades, I said softly, but truth doesn't. For a moment, everything else disappeared, the lights, the guests, even the faint music that tried to fill the silence. My heart was calm. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a strange kind of peace that comes right before the storm. A waiter passed behind me. The clink of his tray reminded me of another sound, a door slamming shut in the snow. The memory hit so hard that for a second, the room dissolved into white. I was 17 again, standing outside our mansion with nothing but a torn backpack. My breath had frozen on my lips. Inside, laughter floated from the windows, muffled but cruelly bright. I knocked once, twice. No answer. Then I saw Celeste's shadow in the upstairs window, phone raised, recording me. The shame burned hotter than the cold. I walked until my feet stopped feeling the ground. I remember finding a bus stop, crawling behind it, and curling up against the wall. The night smelled like gasoline and salt. I didn't cry, I couldn't. Tears would have frozen before they reached my chin. When dawn came, I was still awake, watching the world move on without me. The ballroom snapped back into focus. The music had stopped again. I realized my hand was gripping the edge of the dessert table, holding it like a lifeline. Adam was still holding the papers I'd given him. His eyes flicked from me to Celeste, confusion deepening into something else, doubt. Celeste, he said, is any of this true? Her voice rose an octave. Of course not, she's twisting things like she always did. Enough. My mother's command cut through her words. Margaret glided toward me with the calm precision of someone who has lied for so long it became instinct. Willa, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this ends now. You've made your scene. I suggest you leave before you humiliate yourself further. I turned to her. The years hadn't changed her much. Same perfect makeup, same pearls, same cold distance behind her eyes. Humiliation, I said quietly. That's an interesting word coming from someone who taught me what it means. Her lips tightened, but she said nothing. The crowd was silent again. Only the soft hum of the air conditioner filled the gap. Even the violinist had lowered his bow. You threw me out because I didn't fit your story, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Because you needed the world to see a perfect family, and I didn't look the part. My father finally turned. His voice was low but sharp. That's enough, Willa. I smiled without warmth. Enough? No, father, tonight it's just beginning. Gasps murmured through the room. Celeste laughed, forced, brittle. You sound insane. Maybe. I took a step closer to her. Or maybe I'm the only one here who finally stopped pretending. I reached for the microphone the band had left near the stage. My fingers didn't shake. The sound of feedback echoed briefly, making a few people flinch. I lifted it, letting the weight settle in my palm. Since everyone's already watching, I said, let's make this worth their time. The spotlight shifted slightly, catching the edge of my face. For the first time that night, I wasn't the outcast or the forgotten child. I was the storyteller, and the story was about to turn. You all know the Robbins family, I said. The doctors, the philanthropists, the picture of respectability, but every family portrait hides what doesn't fit in the frame. I was the one cut out of the picture, the one erased. Tonight, I'm simply putting the missing piece back. People began whispering. A few phones lifted discreetly to record. I didn't mind. The truth deserved an audience. Celeste's face had gone pale. My mother's hands were clasped too tightly together. My father had turned to stone. I took a slow breath. You see, 9 years ago, I wasn't just kicked out, I was replaced. The crowd fell silent again. Even the waiters froze where they stood. Celeste tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand. You'll get your turn. Then I looked directly at Adam. His eyes met mine, searching, cautious, but he didn't look away. You deserve to know who you're marrying, I said. The room went still as glass. Tonight, I continued, is not about revenge, it's about truth. And if that truth ruins a few reputations. I smiled faintly. Well, I suppose that's only fair. I lowered the microphone slightly, just enough for my voice to drop into something quieter, more intimate. After all, I was the one who paid for their perfection. Then I looked straight into Celeste's eyes. You took everything that was mine, my name, my future, my place, but not anymore. Her hand tightened on Adam's arm. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I do, I said. And soon, everyone else will too. The lights flickered once as if the building itself sensed the storm gathering. I turned back toward the crowd, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through silk. It's been 9 years since the night they threw me into the snow. Tonight, I'm not asking for anything back. I'm just here to give them what they earned. And as the murmurs rose again, I smiled quietly, almost gently, because deep down, I knew the truth was already beginning to breathe. The applause that followed my words wasn't real applause. It was nervous, broken, a desperate attempt by people to pretend the world hadn't just cracked under their feet. I let them have it. Everyone clings to illusions when truth walks in uninvited. As I stepped away from the spotlight, the scent of wine and expensive perfume faded, replaced by the cold draft that slipped through the half-open door at the back of the ballroom. The air carried something faintly familiar, winter. It always came for me when I spoke too loudly. And suddenly, I was there again. Not the Grand Monarch Hotel, but a forgotten corner of the city 9 years earlier. The snow was falling that night, heavy and unkind. My breath came out white, and my hands were too numb to unzip my jacket. I had nowhere to go. I remember walking past store windows glowing with Christmas lights, people laughing inside restaurants, the smell of roasted chestnuts, everything warm and unreachable. My stomach ached. I hadn't eaten for 2 days. When I found the narrow alley behind the old bus stop on 5th Street, I sat down and pressed my back against the brick wall. The ground was damp. The cold reached through my jeans and into my bones. I kept telling myself I would get up in a minute, find a shelter, knock on a door. But I didn't. I just sat there, listening to the sound of the city ignoring me. That was the first night I realized silence can hurt more than words. The second night, I found a small convenience store that stayed open 24 hours. I spent the last of my money on instant noodles and sat behind the garbage bins to eat. A man passed by, staring at me like I was invisible. Maybe I was. By the third night, I stopped trying to count the hours. Hunger blurred everything. I thought about my mother's voice, my sister's laughter, the heat from our fireplace. I wondered if they ever thought of me, if Celeste ever rewatched the video she took of me leaving, laughing behind the curtains. The snow kept falling, but that night it led me somewhere different. Down the block from an old bookstore, a light flickered from a tiny cafe that looked closed. The sign above the door said Clara's Cup. The smell of coffee drifted into the street. The door was slightly open, and warmth spilled through. I hesitated. My reflection in the glass looked like someone I wouldn't trust, dirty, tired, broken, but I stepped inside anyway. The bell above the door chimed softly. The cafe was empty except for a woman standing behind the counter, wiping a tray with slow, practiced movements. Her hair was streaked with silver, and her apron was dusted with flour. She looked at me as if she had expected me to come. "If you're planning to sleep behind my kitchen," she said, "you might as well mop the floor first." I froze, unsure if she was serious. My lips parted, but no sound came out. She raised an eyebrow. "Well, the mop's in the back." Something about her tone, sharp but not cruel, made me move. I took the mop, cleaned the sticky floor, and when I finished, she placed a plate in front of me. A slice of bread, scrambled eggs, a cup of coffee. "Eat," she said. I ate slowly, the warmth almost painful after so much cold. When I finished, she didn't ask where I came from or why I looked like a runaway. She just pointed toward the back. "There's a small storage room. You can sleep there tonight. Don't steal anything and don't burn the place down." That was the first kindness I'd been shown in 3 days. I lay on a narrow cot, the smell of coffee and baked bread still in the air. The sound of rain tapped against the window. I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling and thought, maybe tomorrow will hurt less. When I woke up, Clara, that was her name, I found out later, was already behind the counter. "You still here?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Then grab a towel, the dishes won't wash themselves." That's how it began. I became part of the cafe, invisible but useful. I cleaned tables, wiped counters, carried crates of milk that were almost heavier than I was. Clara never thanked me, but she always made sure there was food on the counter when I finished my shift. Some nights, she would sit across from me after closing, drinking coffee in silence. Once she said, "You look like someone who ran too far, too fast." I asked her what she meant. She smiled without looking at me. "The ones who end up here always do." Those nights were the first time I felt safe again, even if only for a few hours. I stayed there for months, saved every tip, every spare dollar. When I turned 18, I enrolled for my GED. Clara never said congratulations, but the morning after I passed, she left a cupcake with a candle on the counter. No words. Just that, I blew the candle out and realized something. I didn't need their approval anymore. Not my mother, not my father, not even Celeste. I was building something on my own, one small piece at a time. Back in the present, the sound of a glass breaking pulled me out of the memory. Someone had dropped their champagne flute. The guests were whispering again. Celeste was pale now, her eyes darting from me to Adam to my parents. The air felt tight with panic. My father gestured for security, but Adam held up a hand. "Let her speak," he said. It surprised everyone, including me. His voice had changed. It wasn't filled with confusion anymore. It was calm, deliberate. "Go on, Willa," he said. The way he said my name felt different, like he already knew more than he should. I took a breath, steady and quiet. "Fine, but remember, you asked for this." Then I turned to the crowd again. 9 years ago, I was thrown out of my house. Tonight, I came back to finish the story they started. I learned the rhythm of the cafe like it was a song meant for survival. Dawn deliveries, the hiss of the espresso machine, the bell over the door chiming with each new face. I memorized regular orders before people spoke. The teacher with the tired eyes wanted oat milk and 1 sugar. The night nurse always needed a double shot and a moment of quiet. I watched how Clara moved, steady and exact, how she made a space that felt safe for strangers. I wanted to build something that did the same. On my breaks, I read the labels on sacks of beans, the invoices, the cost of milk from 2 different distributors. I asked questions. Which supplier was reliable? Which contract had small print that bit later? Clara never gave me long speeches. She answered with a nod or a single sentence, then tossed me a rag and sent me back to work. It felt like learning a new language, one made of numbers and patience. After I passed my GED, I took community college classes during the day and work nights. My notebook smelled like coffee and rain because I studied in the back room beside crates of sugar and paper cups. When sleep tried to drag me under, I repeated 3 words until my focus returned. Keep moving forward. The first time a customer told me our soup tasted like home, I wrote the phrase on a napkin and folded it into my pocket. Words like that kept me standing. On hard nights, I would unfold the napkin and read it again, as if it could warm my hands. Money was always a thin line. I mended my shoes with glue and thread. I learned to cook rice 5 different ways so it never felt the same. I saved every coin in a glass jar that used to hold biscotti. When the jar filled, I opened a basic savings account and watched the numbers climb by inches. Sometimes I sat in the bank lobby longer than I needed, just to feel the miracle of being allowed inside. On a rainy afternoon, a woman came in carrying a small boy with a scarf around his head. She ordered a hot chocolate and asked for warm water too. Her hands shook as she counted coins, then stopped when I slid the cup across the counter and said there was no charge. The boy smiled at the first sip, a soft smile that reached his tired eyes. Later, the mother told me he had finished a round of treatment and could barely keep food down. Liquid was easier. Something gentle, she said. Something that did not fight his body. I walked home in the drizzle that evening and could not stop thinking about it. Gentle, not heavy, something that held a person up instead of weighing them down. I started reading about nutrition at the library. I borrowed books that I could not really afford to keep, pages full of science and careful steps. I learned how to balance protein and vitamins for people whose bodies were tired from healing. I began to bring small blends to the cafe for the night nurse, for the teacher, for the boy when he visited again. I wrote down what worked and what did not, and I changed the recipe each time until they nodded and said, "Yes, that is better." When I told Clara I wanted to apply to a business program, she did not smile, but she slid an envelope across the counter. Inside was a list of scholarships and a note that said, "Keep your feet on the floor and your eyes on the numbers." I kept the note in my wallet until the ink faded. I built a tiny page online. No marketing budget, no fancy story, only my name and a promise. Blends made for people who need food to be gentle. I called it anew because there are days when starting over is the bravest thing a body can do. Orders trickled in. I rode a borrowed bike across wet streets to deliver them. I learned which elevators stuck and which doorman would let me in if I said please. I learned that people in pain want to be spoken to like nothing about them is broken, because nothing is. When the first local clinic asked if I could provide a weekly batch, I stood in the supply closet and let myself breathe for a full minute. Then I wrote a proposal on plain paper and rewrote it until it was clean and clear. We signed a simple agreement at a plastic table. I watched the doctor add his name, and something in my chest unlocked. Success did not arrive like a shout. It arrived like a series of steady steps that did not slip. A health writer mentioned anew in a column, and a week later we sold out. A grant for early-stage founders covered a small mixer and better packaging. I hired a delivery student for weekends. I still worked nights at the cafe because I liked the sound of the doorbell and the comfort of Clara counting the till while the city softened outside. The most important lesson was not about recipes or margins. It was about dignity. I saw how people sat taller when you looked them in the eyes and told them you had built something with them in mind. I promised myself that if a new ever grew large, it would never forget to speak softly. There were moments when the past tried to pull me back. A woman at a charity gala asked where I grew up, then tilted her head when I answered. I recognized the tilt. It lived in that old mansion. I smiled and changed the subject. Later that night, I stood on a dark sidewalk and let the cool air fill my lungs. I did not need their rooms anymore. When a new crossed its first big number, I did not post a celebration. I went to the cafe. Clara poured coffee without asking and slid a plate across the counter. The slice of cake was small and perfect. She said nothing. I said thank you. That was our contract. Then came the invitation, heavy paper, raised letters. The robin's name embossed in gold that caught the light like a warning. I turned it over in my hands for a long time. I felt the old ache rise in my throat, then fall away. I placed the invitation in a drawer and went for a walk. The city had that clean late afternoon light that makes every window look forgiving. I thought about the boy with the scarf and the mother with shaking hands. I thought about the teacher, the night nurse, the way simple food can be a kind of shelter. I knew I would go. Not to be seen, not to wound, but to tell the truth where the lie had been living. I began to prepare the way I prepared for any launch. Quietly, carefully, with documents labeled and indexed, with names and dates and signatures in a row. I did not plan to raise my voice. I planned to raise the light. The night before the party, I locked the office and walked to the cafe. The chairs were stacked on the tables. Clara sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the street. She did not ask where I was going. She only said, "Wear something that lets you breathe." I laughed, soft and honest. I told her I would. As I left, she tapped the glass and pointed at the sky. "Snow," she mouthed. The word looked kinder than it used to. I zipped my coat and lifted my face to the first white flecks, and for the first time in years the cold did not feel like an enemy. It felt like air that had remembered my name. Back in the ballroom now, facing the family that forgot me, I could still taste the cafe coffee on my tongue. It steadied me more than any speech. Adam stood a few feet away, the papers in his hand, a crease of focus between his brows. He was watching me as if I were saying something only he could hear. Maybe I was. Maybe I was telling him that I had come ready. That this was not a tantrum, not a performance, but the final page of a chapter that had taken me almost a decade to write. I lifted my chin and met the room. The past had taught me how to stand. The cafe had taught me how to serve. Anew had taught me how to build. Tonight would teach me how to end something without becoming it. I took a breath, then spoke again, not louder, just clearer. The truth was already walking the room. All I had to do was open the door. There is a rhythm to progress that nobody teaches you. It starts slow, uneven, a shuffle more than a step. I worked through those first years like that, half asleep, half awake, driven by something I couldn't yet name. At dawn, I studied. At night, I scrubbed dishes. I lived on coffee, adrenaline, and the quiet thrill of watching myself inch forward. When others my age were planning parties, I was learning how to calculate cost margins, writing essays about supply and demand, memorizing formulas under the buzz of fluorescent lights. The cafe became my second heartbeat. the smell of roasted beans soaked into my clothes. Sometimes I caught myself humming the same tune Clara played on the radio every morning. It was always jazz, steady, patient, forgiving. One evening, when the rush had died down, Clara walked past me wiping her hands on her apron. She said, "You've got that look again." "What look?" "The one that says you're about to jump into something stupid but brave." I laughed. "Maybe I am," she smirked. "Then jump properly, don't just dip your toes." That was Clara's way of saying she believed in me. I saved every tip, every overtime hour. I bought used textbooks, downloaded free lectures, learned marketing from watching other people sell coffee. I noticed how the regulars always came back not because of what we served, but because of how they felt being seen. It wasn't just caffeine, it was belonging. That idea stayed with me. In business class, when the professor asked what I wanted to build, I said, "Something that helps people feel human again." The room laughed softly, thinking I was being poetic, but I meant every word. After months of studying and saving, I moved into a shared apartment with 2 other students. The walls were thin, the plumbing groaned at night, but it was mine. I could hang my coat wherever I wanted and nobody cared if I stayed up reading until 3 in the morning. The more I learned, the more patterns appeared. Food wasn't just food. It was memory, care, time. I remembered the sick boy from the cafe, the way his mother whispered gentle. That word followed me everywhere. Gentle became my compass. So I began experimenting. Blending, testing, recording results. I used borrowed blenders, old mason jars, a notebook filled with smudged measurements. I learned how much protein a tired body could handle, how to make something that tasted alive. When I thought I had something worth sharing, I brought a sample to Clara. She tasted it without asking what it was. "Too sweet," she said. "Really? Real health doesn't need to hide behind sugar." So I tried again. Less sweetness, more balance. When she nodded the second time, I knew I was onto something. I named it anew. The name came late one night while I was washing cups. It wasn't dramatic, it just felt right. Everything I had done until that point was about beginning again, rewriting what had been broken. Anew wasn't just a brand, it was a declaration. I designed the label myself. Plain white background, a single green stem breaking through a crack. Renewal, resilience, simplicity. My first customers were people I already knew: the night nurse, the teacher, the cafe regulars. Then someone mentioned it on social media, and within a week, strangers were ordering online. It wasn't much, just small deliveries I made on my bike, but it was real. Every jar I handed over felt like a piece of me leaving and finding its own purpose. One night, after a delivery run, I returned to the cafe to find Clara sitting in the dark with a cup of coffee. "You've been busy," she said. "I'm trying," she nodded. "You're doing more than trying, you're building." I wanted to tell her how scared I was, how every day I thought about failing, about falling back into the snow I'd crawled out of. But the words didn't come, so I just said, "Thank you," she shrugged. "Don't thank me, you're the one who stayed." Those words stayed with me longer than any compliment. The following year, Anew started gaining traction. A local paper featured the brand under small businesses with big hearts. Orders doubled. I bought a second-hand van for deliveries. I hired a part-time assistant, Noah, a quiet accounting student who turned out to have a talent for logistics. With him came structure. With structure came growth. We built a website, a proper inventory system, and packaging that didn't fall apart in the rain. I was learning what it meant to lead, to trust, to let other hands carry part of the weight. One morning, Clara came by the small warehouse we had rented. She looked around, inspecting the shelves stacked with labeled jars. "This place smells like hope," she said. I laughed. "And coffee?" "Mostly coffee." Then she looked at me for a long moment and said, "Don't let success make you forget hunger. It's the best teacher you'll ever have." I promised I wouldn't. At the end of that year, Anew reached its first milestone: 10,000 orders shipped. It should have felt like triumph, but what I felt was calm, a steady heartbeat that whispered, "You made it this far. Keep moving." I closed my eyes that night and saw the snow again, not as an enemy but as proof. Proof that you can be buried and still find air. Proof that you can begin again. In the quiet before sleep, I thought about the invitation that had started it all, the golden card that waited in my desk drawer. The date of Celeste's engagement party was circled in red. I whispered to myself, "It's time." And when I opened my eyes, I was ready to go back, not to seek revenge, but to end the story they never thought I'd survive. The day I received my degree, the sky above Portland was the same soft gray I remembered from my first winter alone. It felt like a full circle, cold, quiet, familiar. The ceremony was held in a small auditorium, the kind where echoes linger longer than applause. When they called my name, I walked across the stage, and for a split second, I imagined Clara sitting somewhere in the back row. Of course she wasn't there, she hated crowds. But I could almost hear her voice anyway, saying, "Don't trip, keep your chin up." There were no family photos, no bouquets, no hugs waiting at the exit. I took a picture of myself holding the diploma and smiled into the phone camera. It wasn't joy exactly. It was something steadier, like standing on solid ground after years of sinking. After graduation, the work didn't slow, it multiplied. I applied for every grant I could find. I pitched to investors who smiled politely and told me my idea was sweet but small. They wanted numbers, margins, projections. I gave them stories instead. Stories of patients who couldn't eat, of parents who needed simple nutrition for their children. Most of them dismissed me, but one didn't. Her name was Dana Sue, a venture consultant with a reputation for finding hidden gems. She didn't interrupt when I spoke. She just listened, tapping her pen softly against her notebook. At the end, she said, "You're not selling drinks, you're selling dignity. Don't forget that." A few months later, she helped me secure a modest loan through an entrepreneurship fund. It wasn't much, but it was enough to move Anu out of the cafe storage room and into a rented space with 2 refrigerators and a single desk. Noah and I spent nights labeling jars until our hands cramped. We argued about color palettes, debated fonts, laughed at our own exhaustion. He believed in Anu even more fiercely than I did sometimes. "You don't build something like this unless it's meant to outlive you," he said once, half joking, half serious. The brand began to catch attention. A medical journal mentioned us in an article about nutritional recovery. Then a local hospital asked for a trial order for post-surgery patients. That one email changed everything. Within weeks, Anu was no longer a whisper in the background, it was a real name. We streamlined supply chains, upgraded equipment, and created a new flavor line inspired by comfort foods: apple cinnamon, soft vanilla oat, cocoa blend. But the moment that stayed with me wasn't a business deal. It was when an elderly woman came into the office with a paper bag full of empty jars. She said her husband had passed away, and our shakes had been the only thing he could swallow during his last months. She didn't come for refunds or sympathy. She just wanted to return the jars so someone else could use them. That day, I sat in my car for a long time, the bag of jars beside me, and cried quietly. It wasn't grief, exactly. It was gratitude, heavy and real. Every success after that felt both lighter and lonelier. The bigger Anu grew, the smaller my old life seemed. Yet somehow, the ghost of that life followed me everywhere. Interviews, award dinners, magazine photo shoots. Each time someone mentioned the Robbins name, I felt a ripple of something sour beneath the praise. Once, a reporter asked about my family. I smiled and said, "They're part of the story that made me who I am." It was the truth, though not in the way she imagined. By the time I turned 25, Anu had reached $5 million in annual revenue. We were signing contracts with hospitals across the state, negotiating expansion to other regions. There were photos of me shaking hands, standing behind podiums, wearing a confidence I had learned like armor. But late at night, when the cameras were gone and the office was silent, I would sometimes sit with a cup of coffee and stare at the city lights. Success hadn't erased the past, it had only drawn a sharper contrast. The invitation still sat in my drawer. I had touched it so many times that the gold embossing had started to fade. Celeste Robbins and Dr. Adam Keller. The date was 2 weeks away. I wondered if Adam still remembered me. Back then, before everything, he was the one person who treated me like I mattered. We had studied together for a summer project once. He said I had a quiet kind of brilliance. I didn't know if he meant it, but the words had stayed. He had been kind in the way that people are kind before they learn which side they're supposed to be on. When I heard he was marrying Celeste, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt inevitability. In our family, appearances were destiny. The night before the party, Noah and I stayed late finalizing shipment reports. He caught me staring at the invitation on my desk. "You really going?" he asked. "Yes." "Why?" I smiled faintly. "Because some ghosts don't rest until you look them in the eye." He hesitated, then said, "If you need backup, I won't." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Then come back for cake after, you'll need it." I promised I would. When I got home, I packed a small clutch. Inside, I placed the documents I had spent months collecting: university transcripts, financial records, letters that told stories my family had buried under wealth. Each paper was a piece of a puzzle I had carried too long. I didn't want revenge. Revenge burns fast and leaves you empty. What I wanted was truth, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, watching the faint light crawl across the ceiling. I thought of Clara's cafe, of the snow outside, of my father's cold voice, my mother's indifference, Celeste's laughter behind a curtain. All of it felt distant now, like old film footage, grainy, faded, no longer painful. In the morning, I stood before the mirror and adjusted my black dress. It was simple, elegant, deliberate. I didn't need sequins or silk to belong. As I applied a touch of lipstick, I caught my reflection's eyes. There was a steadiness there that hadn't existed 9 years ago. Not the anger of a wounded girl, but the calm of a woman who had learned what her worth was without anyone else defining it. I whispered to my reflection, "They'll see me this time." And as I stepped out the door into the cold morning air, the city light turned gold against the skyline, and the snow began to fall, soft, slow, like a curtain rising on the scene I had spent nearly a decade preparing for. I did not raise my voice. I let the room do that for me. Fear carries farther than fury ever will. The guests were already leaning in, already recording, already deciding which version of the story would look best in morning light. I held the microphone like a glass of water and spoke as if we were sitting at a small table, just the four of us. "Mother, Father, Celeste, me. You said I chose to leave," I began. "You forgot to mention who chose the lie." My mother folded her hands. She had that expression she saved for board members and clergy. Calm, composed, clean. "Willa, this is not the time." "It is exactly the time." I nodded toward Adam. He had not moved from Celeste's side, but his eyes were fixed on the papers he still held. He looked like a man who had opened a door and found a different house. "This is an engagement party," Celeste said. Her voice quivered at the edges. "No one wants your tragic memoir." "I am not here with a memoir," I said. "I am here with a record." I clicked the small remote inside my palm. The ballroom screen lit up, first with a neutral title page, Robin's Family Records. The words sat there plain and unadorned, like winter on a white field. A murmur drifted through the crowd. Photographs appeared, hospital paperwork, dates, the day I was born, the day Celeste was born, certificates that should have matched their signatures but did not. A second set that did. Then a third file with a notarized statement from a clinic director who no longer worked for our father. My mother's face did not break. It tightened the way a seam does before it splits. "You forged mine," I said softly. "You adjusted hers. You created a story where I was the burden and she was the heir. You did not erase me from your house that night. You erased me from your name years before." My father finally spoke. "You are confused." "Am I?" I stepped closer to the dais. The spotlight caught dust in the air and turned it to glitter. "Explain the transfer request that changed the record of parentage 3 months after Celeste was born. Explain the payment from Robin's care to the private registry officer. Explain why the dates never lined up unless someone guided them with a very steady hand." No one moved. I could hear the soft click of a phone camera in the second row. "Gregory," my mother whispered, "say something." He did not. He looked at the screen and at me and at the floor, and for a second I saw a man who wished desperately to be anywhere but inside himself. Celeste stared at the papers in Adam's hands. "This is malicious," she said. "She is jealous, she hates me, that is all this is." I turned back to the crowd. "I do not hate you," I said to her. "I have never hated you. I hated the silence that grew around us until even snow sounded loud, but you were not the author of that silence." I paused, then met her eyes. "You were the ornament." The last word hung there, heavy and painful. I did not enjoy saying it. Truth rarely tastes sweet when it is new. On the screen appeared a final document. It was not dramatic. It did not need to be. It was a letter, signed and sealed, confirming that the original records had been altered at the request of our parents for reasons listed as image protection. The phrase made a few guests flinch. Image protection. The room was full of people who understood those 2 words too well. "Who are you?" a man near the back asked. "If not what they made you." I lifted my chin. "I am the only legitimate child of Gregory and Margaret Robbins. I am the daughter you struck from your tree. I am the name you hid behind a prettier name." The chandelier trembled in the air conditioning. My mother reached for a glass and missed. My father's jaw worked as if words were something he needed to chew before trying them again. Adam finally looked up. I felt the weight of his gaze like a hand on my shoulder from across the room. Not comfort, not rescue, a recognition, a witness. It almost steadied me. Celeste pulled at his sleeve. "Tell her to stop." He did not answer. He was reading the last page in the envelope, the one that listed a sequence of wire transfers tied to a consultant who specialized in inconvenient paperwork. When he reached the end, he closed his eyes, only for a heartbeat. When he opened them, something had settled there. Not anger, not shock. The quiet kind of understanding that ends denial. My mother found her voice. "You were a difficult child," she said evenly. "You would not adapt. You pushed. You questioned. You do not understand what it takes to maintain a life of significance." I smiled without mirth. Significance is a word rich people use when they mean spectacle. She colored for the first time that night. "Enough," my father said. He tried to step forward and stumbled against the lip of the stage. A waiter reached out and steadied him before moving away, as if he had touched a current. I could have pressed harder. I could have shouted. I could have asked Celeste, who recorded me in the snow and posted it to friends with a caption that turned my exile into a joke. But I did not come to crush. I came to place the weight of truth where it belonged. I set the microphone on the stand and let the room breathe. The murmurs rose, circled, then slowed again as I spoke once more, quieter now. "You did not ruin me when you changed those records," I said. "You made me. You taught me to build a life without an audience. You taught me the difference between being important and being useful. I chose useful." A woman near the front nodded before she could stop herself. I saw it and wanted to hug her for it. "I am not here to destroy a celebration," I continued. "I am here to make sure the foundation under it is real. If you wish to toast this union, toast it with eyes open." I turned to Celeste. "You can be more than a story they wrote to please a room." She stared at me as if I had spoken a language she almost remembered. The screen went black. I clicked the remote once more and a single sentence appeared in calm serif letters. "Truth does not break families. Lies do." For a long moment no one moved. Then the sound returned all at once. Chairs scraped. Someone coughed. A fork clinked against a plate and jumped like a small animal. My mother leaned close to my father. Her lips barely moved. I knew that whisper. It was the same one that had followed me down hallways all my life. Contain, correct, control. I stepped back from the light. The first tremor of the night was over. The cracks were clean. The pieces had begun to separate. Across the marble, Adam folded the papers and slipped them into the inner pocket of his jacket. It was a simple gesture, but it told me everything I needed to know. He was not going to pretend this had not occurred. He had chosen to hold the evidence against the noise. He met my eyes and gave the smallest nod. I felt the floor under my feet steady. The rise had begun, not the rise of status, the rise of something older and truer, the rise of a name reclaimed without asking permission. I lifted the microphone one last time for this round and said, "We can continue with cake if you like." A few people laughed before they realized I meant it. Even scandal needs sugar to keep from shaking. The lights softened. The band did not play. The room waited for the next page to turn. It would. I was not done. I never am when truth is only halfway in. The air felt charged, alive with something between awe and fear. I could almost see the thoughts passing through every face in that room, the quiet recalculation of alliances, the gossip already forming into stories for tomorrow's brunch. I stood still and let them write their versions. The truth didn't need me to defend it. It could stand on its own now. Celeste broke first. "You planned this," she said, stepping toward me. "You waited years to humiliate me in front of everyone." I turned slightly, enough for the light to hit both our faces. "No, Celeste, I waited years for you to stop pretending you were the victim." Her lips trembled. "I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," I said softly, "but you accepted it. You wore the crown built from someone else's name, and you never asked why it fit so tightly." A few gasps escaped from the crowd. I could feel their sympathy shifting, fracturing between us. Celeste's tears gathered but didn't fall. She wanted someone, anyone, to save her from this moment. My mother looked away. My father stared at the floor. That was when I realized the difference between us. Celeste still needed their validation. I had learned to breathe without it. Adam cleared his throat. The sound drew every eye. "Maybe this is something the family should discuss privately." I smiled faintly. Privately is what they've always wanted. That's how lies survive in privacy. He didn't argue. He just looked at me again, that same quiet focus I remembered from years ago when he helped me fix an old science project. There was something different behind his calm now, a knowing that unsettled even me. The security guards by the door hesitated. No one dared to move. The guests hovered between curiosity and discomfort. The chandeliers flickered as if the building itself wanted to exhale. I took a slow step toward the stage. The marble under my heels echoed like a metronome counting down the last beats of an old song. "For years," I said, "I thought the worst thing you could do to someone was to cast them out. But it is. The worst thing you can do is to erase them while pretending to love them." My mother flinched just once. That small break in her composure was worth every winter I'd survived. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," I continued. "I'm asking for acknowledgement." She pressed her fingers to her temple. "Willa, you're making a spectacle." I'm making a point, I said. You can only bury the truth so deep before it starts digging its way back. The screen behind me changed again, photographs from charity events, awards, donations made in the Robins' name. All the headlines that built their empire of virtue. Then, side by side, the legal transfers that funded them, the shell companies tied to false reports. The evidence I had gathered for months. A wave of shock swept through the crowd. The room was no longer silent. Phones rose again, fingers tapped frantically, whispers turned into a low hum. My father tried to speak. You don't understand the pressures of lying? I asked quietly. No, I understand them very well. They're heavy. You carried them for years and still thought they made you look taller. He faltered, and in that tiny pause the entire illusion cracked. I turned away before satisfaction could taint the moment. Justice isn't sweet. It's bitter, clean, necessary. Then I looked back at Adam. He hadn't moved. He was still watching me, his jaw tight. You already knew, I said to him. His silence was answer enough. Celeste followed my gaze. What do you mean, he knew? Adam said nothing. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a second envelope, one identical to the one I had brought. She's not the only one who's been looking into this, he said quietly. The entire room froze. My breath caught, though I didn't show it. This wasn't part of my script, and yet something in me wasn't surprised. He placed the envelope on the table beside the first. I work with Robin's Care, he said, and I've seen enough irregularities to know she's telling the truth. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, but it's also an audit, one that's long overdue. My mother's face drained of color. My father stumbled back a step, his hand reaching for the tablecloth as if for balance. You planned this together. Celeste whispered, disbelief breaking her voice. Adam turned to her, gentle but firm. I planned to stop pretending. The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Some people left their seats, others stayed, unable to look away. Celeste looked at me, her expression collapsing into something between rage and heartbreak. You think this makes you the hero? No, I said. It makes me honest. The ballroom felt smaller now, as if truth had taken up all the space. The chandeliers glowed brighter, harsh, and beautiful. Adam spoke again, not to me this time, but to the room. The board of Robin's Care has already been notified. Investigators will arrive within the hour. I suggest everyone here enjoy the dessert while they can. There was a ripple of laughter, nervous, uncertain, then the realization that he wasn't joking. I met his eyes. For the first time that night, he smiled. Not the smile of a savior, but of an accomplice who understood what the word justice truly meant. And just like that, I saw the full picture. The envelopes, the nod earlier, the deliberate calm. He hadn't betrayed me by standing beside Celeste. He had been waiting just like I had for the right stage, the right witnesses, the right moment. The twist had always been there, hidden in plain sight. Celeste's hands shook. You ruined us, she whispered. I took a step closer. No, Celeste. You let them ruin you, and I just stopped pretending not to see it. Someone started clapping, slow, uncertain, almost embarrassed. Then another joined. It wasn't applause for me, it was for the truth finally unmasked. As the sound filled the hall, I realized my voice was no longer trembling. My hands weren't cold. I had entered this room as a ghost. Now, for the first time in 9 years, I felt alive. The party was still technically ongoing, but the celebration had ended long ago. What was left now was clarity and maybe, somewhere deep beneath the shock, relief. I set the microphone down gently and walked toward the exit. Nobody stopped me this time. Behind me, the lights dimmed. Ahead of me, the night waited, sharp, cold, infinite. Snow had begun to fall again outside the Grand Monarch, tiny white flakes catching in my hair. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel them sting. I whispered to the wind, "That's enough light for one night." And as I stepped into the quiet street, the ballroom behind me erupted with sirens, flashes, and the first cries of reckoning. Cold air slid around my ankles as the door of the Grand Monarch closed behind me. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs only to winter nights and empty cathedrals. Snow gathered along the curb in soft lines. For a long breath, I just stood there and watched it fall, letting the noise from the ballroom fade to a distant blur. I could have kept walking. I could have turned the corner and let the night swallow the rest of the evening without a backward glance. That was the ending I used to imagine, neat and clean. Leave the scene, close the book, never look back. But the truth does not end when you step outside. It keeps moving inside the room you left, rewriting conversations, changing loyalties, touching people you did not mean to touch. I knew that, so I waited. The revolving door spun once and Adam stepped out into the cold. He did not bring a coat. He did not seem to notice the snow settling on his shoulders. He stopped a few feet away and lifted his hands in a small, almost apologetic gesture. "I thought you might leave," he said. "I considered it." He studied my face as if trying to read a note he had written years ago. "You were careful," he said. "Dates, transfers, witnesses. You made sure the story could not be bent." "I had to," he nodded. "You should know something. What you set in motion tonight has timing." "What kind of timing?" He glanced at the hotel. "The board counsel has been in a private room since before the toast, so have 2 auditors who do not mind late hours. In a few minutes, outside counsel will arrive, and they will ask for the documents you brought, which means you will need to decide whether to hand them over or to keep them and risk being painted as dramatic rather than credible." I watched his breath fog in the air. "You planned this part too." "I planned for opportunity," he said. "You brought the truth." "I brought the clock." There was no triumph in his voice, only a strange gentleness that made me remember the summer we built a model out of cardboard and string and he told me failure teaches faster than praise. He had not changed as much as I thought. Life had only put him in better suits. "What do you want from me, Adam?" I asked. "Not forgiveness," he said. "Not approval, just presence. Stay. Do not vanish before the door opens. If you leave now, they will say your evidence was a performance. If you stay, it becomes a record." A gust of wind lifted a curl of snow into the air. Somewhere down the block, a taxi honked once, a sound like an impatient bird. "People will think you set a trap for her," I said. He looked toward the glass where the chandelier burned like a small sun. "People will think what they need to think to make sense of themselves. I cannot manage that for them." His eyes returned to mine. "I can only make sure the right hands touch the right papers." For the first time that night, I let the silence between us sit without trying to fill it. He did not move closer. I did not either. We were a measured distance apart, like 2 lines that had once crossed and now ran parallel again, steady and separate. 10 minutes, he said. Then the door will open." He turned and went back inside, carrying the cold in with him. I walked to the edge of the awning and stood where the snow could find my hair. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Thank you for your submission," it read. "Your file is active. Further contact to follow." The signature was formal and short. It did not need to say more. I slipped the phone into my clutch and closed my eyes. I thought of Clara's note, the one about keeping my eyes on the numbers. I thought of the boy with the scarf and the woman with the empty jars. I thought of the way truth, when spoken out loud, stops belonging only to you. When I opened my eyes, the city had taken on that silver tone that makes everything look more honest. I could see my reflection in the glass as a faint shape layered over the ballroom. A ghost and a woman finally occupying the same outline. The door turned again. A pair of men in charcoal suits stepped out, then a woman with a leather case that looked heavier than it was. They did not scan the street. They already knew where they were going. They passed me with polite nods and went inside. I followed. The warmth hit like a perfume you forgot you owned. The same music was playing, softer now, as if the instruments were embarrassed to be heard. I moved along the wall, past clusters of guests pretending to converse, past my mother's friends with their careful smiles, past the table where the 6-tier cake waited under a crown of white flowers. Adam met me at the base of the stairs that led to the private suites. He offered his arm. I did not take it. He did not seem offended. He only said, "Up there," and I climbed beside him. The small conference room had no windows, a long table, water glasses lined like soldiers. At the far end sat the chair of the board and 2 partners from a firm I recognized from financial pages. My father was not there. My mother was not there. Celeste was not there. Their absence made a strange kind of sense. Truth often arrives first to the people who must hold it without theatrics. The woman with the leather case introduced herself and asked if I would place my documents on the table. Her voice was kind and precise. I set the folder down. She did not touch it immediately. She asked where I obtained each item, how it had been stored, who had handled it. "Chain of custody," she said, almost to herself, like a teacher checking a sum. She recorded my answers, then opened the folder and began to read. Time changed shape in that room. It flattened, it stretched, it became a thin cord we all held with our fingertips. Adam did not sit. He stood with his back near the door as if guarding nothing and everything at once. When the partners finished the first pass, the chair of the board lifted her gaze to me. She was older than my mother and far less breakable. "If what is here is confirmed," she said, "your parents face more than embarrassment." "I know," I said. "Do you intend to seek damages?" she asked, "or only correction?" "Correction," I said, "and protection for the patients, for employees who did not make these choices, for anyone whose name was used as cover." The room drew a long breath together. The chair nodded once. "Then we are aligned." She turned to the counsel. "Proceed." A soft knock at the door. A hotel manager leaned in and whispered to Adam. He listened, nodded, and closed the door quietly. He did not report what he had heard. He did not need to. In my bones, I already knew. Something in the hall had shifted from rumor to rule. The partner slid a single page across the table. "We will need your signature to acknowledge the handoff," she said. "After that, you may choose to remain or to leave." I read the page. Simple language, clear limits. No theater, I signed. As I set the pen down, the air in the room changed again. It became lighter, as if the building had opened a hidden window. The chair stood. "So did I," she offered her hand. I shook it. "You understand that by staying," she said. "You become part of the official record of this evening." "I understand," I said. "I am tired of being an unofficial story." The door opened from the outside. This time it was not a manager. It was a man with a badge that reflected the ceiling light. His presence was quiet and absolute. Behind him stood 2 hotel security officers who had stopped pretending to be part of the decor. "Good evening," the man said. "We will be brief." He did not look at me first. He looked at the chair, then at the counsel. Lastly at Adam, who stepped aside so the man could enter fully. The clock that Adam had promised had reached the hour. The night had moved from exposure to consequence. No one raised a voice. No one needed to. The scene had found its gravity. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding and felt something inside me unclench. There would be more questions. There would be headlines and blame and voices from the past trying to pull me back into old rooms. But a door had opened that could not be shut now. When we filed out into the hallway, the orchestra below began a new song that sounded like a lullaby for grown people who had forgotten how to sleep. I stood at the top of the stairs and watched the crowd ripple. My mother had reappeared, eyes bright, mouth calm, arranging the shards of a story that no longer fit. My father stood alone near the bar, shoulders smaller than I remembered. Celeste sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. I thought of walking down to her. I thought of sitting beside her and saying something kind. In the end, I did not. Kindness is not always entrance. Sometimes it is distance that does not punish. Adam came to stand beside me. We did not speak. We watched the room the way you watch the tide. 10 minutes, he had said. The door had opened exactly when he promised. I closed my eyes for a moment and pictured a small cafe where the bell above the door chimed each time someone came in from the cold. I could almost hear Clara say, "Where something that lets you breathe." I was breathing. Finally, fully, without asking permission. And the night, which had begun as a confrontation, was slowly becoming a return. Not to them, to myself. By the time the meeting ended, it was close to midnight. The ballroom was half empty, its light dimmed to a soft amber that made everything look older. Waiters moved quietly, collecting half-finished glasses of champagne, resetting the room as if trying to erase the memory of what had happened. I stayed near the balcony doors, watching the faint reflection of myself in the glass. For the first time, the reflection didn't frighten me. It didn't accuse or question. It simply existed, calm, whole, unhidden. Behind me, the board's lawyers were packing up their briefcases. The woman with the leather case gave me a small nod before she left. It wasn't sympathy, it was respect. She understood the weight of a truth that had been buried too long. Adam walked over. The exhaustion in his eyes matched my own. "They've agreed to full disclosure," he said. "There will be an investigation into every account connected to Robin's care. It won't be easy, but it will be clean." I nodded. "And Celeste?" He hesitated. "She'll be questioned, but not charged. They believe she was a pawn in their scheme." I stared at the flickering chandelier. She always was. He didn't answer. We both knew there was no victory in any of this, only a shifting of weight from one side of the scale to the other. "I never meant for you to get caught in this," I said. Adam shook his head. "I walked into it with my eyes open. I just didn't expect you to walk in with the same plan." I smiled faintly. Guess we both learned to play chess. For a long moment we stood there, the quiet between us heavy but not hostile. There were no apologies left to give, no explanations that could undo years of silence. There was only the strange comfort of knowing we had both chosen truth over convenience. "I should go," I said finally. He nodded. "You'll be hearing from them in the morning. They'll need formal testimony." "I know." As I turned to leave, he said, "Willa." I looked back. "You did the right thing." "Right things are rarely easy," I said. He smiled, tired and sincere. "That's why they need people like you to do them." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the cold hit me like a baptism. The snow had thickened, turning the street into a field of quiet white. A black car waited at the curb, Noah's car. He got out as soon as he saw me and opened the door. "Thought you might need a ride," he said. I climbed in, grateful for the warmth. The smell of coffee filled the small space. He'd brought 2 cups from a late-night cafe. He handed me one without speaking. As we drove through the sleeping city, the silence between us felt easy. "How bad was it?" he asked eventually. I stared at the snow streaking across the window. "Bad enough to make headlines, good enough to make change." He nodded slowly. "Then it's done." "Almost," I said. We crossed the river bridge, the city lights stretching out behind us. The reflection of the skyline shimmered on the water, fractured, beautiful, whole in its brokenness. "Do you regret it?" he asked. I took a sip of the coffee, still hot enough to burn. "No," I said. "I regret waiting so long." He smiled. "Clara would be proud." At the sound of her name, something warm filled my chest. "She taught me that truth is like bread," I said. "Hard to make, easy to burn, but worth it when you get it right." We stopped at a red light. For a moment, the world was perfectly still. Then Noah said, "So what now?" "Now," I looked out at the snow swirling around the street lamps. "Now I start again." The light turned green. When we reached the edge of town, I asked him to pull over by the riverbank. He looked confused but didn't argue. I stepped out and walked toward the railing. The water moved slowly under the ice, steady and silent. I took the last document from my clutch, the original forged certificate that had erased me, and held it in my hands. The paper was thin, almost translucent in the moonlight. I tore it in half, then into quarters. Then into smaller and smaller pieces until it was nothing but confetti in my palms. When the wind picked up, I opened my hands and let it go. The fragments scattered over the river, dissolving as they fell. For years I had imagined this moment would feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like release. I whispered, "It's done." Noah called from the car. "Everything okay?" I turned back to him and smiled. "Better than okay," he grinned. "Then how about that cake I promised?" I laughed, a real laugh this time, the kind that shakes something loose inside you. "Let's go." We drove to Grace's Bakery, the same cafe that never slept. The bell above the door chimed as we entered, and the smell of sugar and cinnamon wrapped around me like an embrace. The baker looked up from the counter. "You again," she said. "Long night?" "The longest," I replied. She cut 2 generous slices of chocolate cake and poured steaming cups of coffee. We took the corner table, the one by the window, and sat in comfortable silence. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless. Inside, the world finally felt still. Noah raised his fork like a toast. "To endings," he said. I clinked my fork against his. "To beginnings," he smiled. "Same thing, really." I looked out the window, where the flakes danced in the streetlight like tiny pieces of truth, falling gently but surely to the ground. And for the first time in years, I felt free, not because the past had vanished, but because I no longer carried it alone. Morning came the way winter mornings do, pale and indecisive, as if the light was unsure it had permission to return. I woke before the alarm, already dressed in the quiet that follows a storm. The city outside my window looked rinsed. Headlines had begun to bloom on my phone, each trying to turn last night into a neat sentence. None of them could. Truth is never neat. It is a rope. You pull one end and an entire history shifts. My appointment with the investigators was at 9. I arrived early and sat in a chair that tried to be comfortable and failed. The conference room was the same kind of careful as the one at the hotel. No art, no distraction. Paper, pens, names, a pot of coffee that tasted exactly like honesty, a little bitter and very strong. They asked for the story again, not the dramatic version, the precise one. Where did I get each file? Who handed it to me? When did I first suspect the records were altered? I answered slowly, walking the line between memory and proof. I kept my voice level. Rage is a poor witness. Detail is a perfect one. Near the end, the senior investigator folded her hands. Her eyes were kind but alert, the way a lighthouse is kind to ships. She said, "Ms. Robbins, were you aware that Mr. Keller contacted our office months ago?" I felt my pulse change, but not my face. "Months ago," I repeated. She nodded. "He brought irregularities tied to Robbins' care billing and research grants. He did not mention you. He did not mention the family records. He showed us numbers and asked a single question. Does this hold? When we said it did not, he asked what kind of documentation would convince the board. She paused. He has been building the path you used last night. I thought of Adam on the balcony, his voice careful, his steps measured. He had not been guessing his way through the dark. He had been laying down lights. Quiet ones, one by one. Why did he not bring the rest, I asked. The family, the birth records, the lies that started all the others. Because she said those were not his to carry, and because he needed what you carried to make the case complete. 2 halves of one door. When the session ended, she escorted me to the hall. Your statement is clear, she said. You may be contacted again. There will be noise now. Let it happen. Noise is not the same as doubt. She smiled once, brief and real. Then the door closed and I was alone with the long corridor and the sound of the heating vents. Outside, the air felt newer than it had any right to be. I walked without deciding where to go. My feet chose the direction. They led me to Clara's cup as if every street in the city could remember who had taught me to stand. The bell chimed. The same tired plant in the window tilted toward the weak sun. Clara looked up, then down again at her ledger. "You look like a verdict," she said. "How does a verdict look? Like someone who finally believes herself." I laughed and it came out a little broken. I poured my own coffee and sat on the stool where I used to count tips. Clara cleaned the same stretch of counter twice, then said, "You saw him last night." "The doctor, Adam," I said. She nodded without looking at me. "He came by here once. Months ago, asked about you. He did not ask the wrong questions. He did not ask the right ones either. He looked tired in the way people look when they have decided to be decent no matter the cost. What did you tell him? That you were busy, that you had learned to breathe, that if he wanted to help, he should speak to the people who think help is a trick." I traced the rim of my cup with one finger. Clara never used 3 sentences when one would do. Her mercy was always measured. "Thank you," I said. "Do not thank me. This is your work." Mine was a mop and a room with a door that closed. The bell chimed again. Adam stood in the doorway, snow melting on his collar. For a moment the cafe held its breath like the ballroom had, though this time it was a softer thing. He stepped inside and took off his gloves. Clara looked at him as if he were a package she had been expecting. She nodded toward the table by the window and then vanished into the back, a magician who only knows one trick but does it perfectly. He sat across from me. No grand preface. No apology shaped like a monologue. Just a quiet, "You spoke well last night." I raised an eyebrow. "You planned well?" He shook his head. "I prepared. Planning is pretending the world will behave. Preparation is knowing it will not. You contacted them months ago," I said. He sighed. "I should have done it years ago. I saw numbers that refused to balance and told myself they were the cost of progress. Then I saw patience. I saw the way the ledger looked when a human face is drawn in the margin. I brought what I could. But there were rooms I could not enter. Family rooms. Your rooms. You could have told me." He held my gaze. "You were busy surviving. I had no right to hand you a match and ask you to burn your past on my schedule. I waited for a sign that you were ready to set your own fire. Last night was not a surprise. It was a confirmation. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that leaving me in the dark was another kind of lie. The words did not hold. Something in his face said the thing I had been trying not to hear. He had been carrying a piece of this quietly, and it had bent him. He said, "There is something else." His voice lowered. "The first irregularity I ever found came from a department I oversaw. A trial billed twice. A fund moved through a program I signed. It was presented to me as a clerical fix. It was not. I looked away because looking would have cost me more than I was brave enough to pay. For that I am sorry." I let the apology sit between us until it stopped trying to be forgiven and turned into a fact. Then I asked, "Why tell me now?" "Because before last night I was a witness. Today I am also a confession. I have given my statement. There will be consequences. I am not asking you to shield me from them. I am asking you to know that guilt can be a door if you let it, not a life sentence. A door." We watched the steam lift from our cups and disappear. Snow tapped gently on the window. Clara came back with 2 slices of something that tasted like cinnamon and decisions. She left before either of us could say thank you. Adam said, "You do not owe me anything. Not your company, not your friendship, not your forgiveness. If you want me out of every room you will ever stand in, say the word and I will make that true. But if you want a partner in what comes next, not a savior, I can be that." Quietly, completely, with my name on the paperwork and my hands where they can be seen. I thought of the boardroom, the balcony, the careful clock he had set running. I thought of the boy with the scarf and the woman with the jars. I thought of how many rooms it would take to make this right. More than I could hold alone. The truth may not need defense, but the people it frees often do. I said, "This is not a redemption arc for either of us." "Good," he said. "I do not trust arcs. I trust work." We settled into a silence that felt like a plan beginning to breathe, not a scheme. A plan made of small verbs: call, file, meet, protect, pay, repair. Outside, the sky found its color again. Inside, the cafe felt like it always had on mornings when the city was new and the bell was a promise. Clara wiped a clean counter as if it needed it. She always did that when she was pleased. Adam finished his coffee and stood. "We will be asked to appear together this afternoon," he said. "Council thinks it will help the board accept a full audit if we present as aligned." He waited. "Not pushing, not presuming, I will be there," I said. He nodded once and left without turning the moment into something larger than it needed to be. The door closed softly behind him. The bell chimed its small, faithful note. Clara leaned on the counter. "You will need more cake," she said. "Why?" "Because you are going to tell the truth again. It takes sugar to keep the hands from shaking." I smiled and felt it reach all the way to the part of me that had been cold for years. "Then give me the biggest piece," I said. "We have work to do." The snow had stopped by noon, leaving the streets shining under a weak sun. From the window of the office, the city looked almost forgiving, the way light forgives broken glass by making it shimmer. Adam and I were back in the same room as the morning, though the tension had softened into focus. Documents lined the table like quiet witnesses, each page a confession written in ink and numbers. The auditors asked their final round of questions. Every answer led to another small truth, and with each truth the size of the lie became visible. Robin's care had not been a single act of corruption, it was an architecture of silence. Department heads who looked away, accountants who rounded numbers, lawyers who signed letters they did not read, and under it all, the same logic that had ruled my family, image before integrity. At 3 o'clock, the door opened, and the board chair returned. "The preliminary findings are complete," she said. "The federal investigation will proceed. You will both be notified of further hearings. For now, we advise you to leave the city for a few days." Leave the city. The phrase hit me harder than expected. I had built my entire new life here, every corner of it traced back to the streets that once ignored me, yet the idea of stepping away felt right, necessary, even. Healing sometimes needs distance to breathe. Adam gathered the files into a neat stack. His hands were steady. "I'll handle the follow-up calls," he said. "You don't need to stay for the fallout." "I'm not afraid of it," I replied. "I know," he said, "but you don't owe it anything either." We walked out together, into air that smelled faintly of snowmelt and exhaust. The street was busy again. People hurried past with their coffees and their phones, unaware that the story of a powerful family was crumbling just a few blocks away. "Do you ever wonder what comes after truth?" I asked as we waited at the crosswalk. Smiled a little. "Work, always work." The light changed. We crossed in silence. That evening, I went back to my apartment. I hadn't been there since the night before the party. The dress I'd worn still hung over a chair, the black fabric catching the last of the daylight. I folded it carefully and placed it in a box. I didn't need reminders. The weight of memory was enough. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number again. "Willa, you've been cleared for protection under the Witness Cooperation Clause. Travel is optional, assistance available if needed." It was official language for something deeply human. "You are safe now." I set the phone down and went to the window. Across the street, the bakery lights flickered on. Grace's Bakery, Noah's favorite place, where the air always smelled of sugar and rain. A few minutes later, I saw him through the glass, waving for me to come over. He held up 2 fingers, then mimed drinking coffee. I laughed and nodded. When I stepped outside, the cold caught my breath but didn't steal it. I walked across the street, pushed open the door, and let the warmth of the bakery wrap around me. The bell chimed its usual welcome. "Long day?" Noah asked, sliding a cup across the counter. "Longest," I said. He poured coffee into 2 mugs. "You look lighter." "I think I am." He leaned against the counter. "So, what happens next for Willa Robbins, the woman who toppled an empire?" "Paperwork," I said, smiling. "Testimonies." "Maybe a long nap," he laughed. "And after that?" I hesitated, then looked out the window where people passed without noticing us. "After that, I think I'll rebuild, but slower this time. Smaller, maybe open a foundation, something for the ones who get left behind when the powerful play pretend." He nodded. "Sounds right." We sat in silence for a moment. The bakery clock ticked softly above the doorway. Outside, the snow on the sidewalk had turned to slush, reflecting the orange glow of streetlights. Life was moving again. "You know," Noah said, "I read the headlines. They call you the whistleblower heiress. You hate that, don't you?" I smiled. "I'm not an heiress. I'm a woman who learned how to tell the truth and still sleep at night, that's all." "Still," he said, "it's got a ring to it." I rolled my eyes. "You're impossible." He grinned. "That's why you keep me around." The door opened, and a rush of cold air swept through. For a second, I thought it was Adam again. But it was only a couple coming in, laughing, shaking snow from their coats. I realized I didn't need to look over my shoulder anymore. The past had lost its claim. Noah raised his cup. "To truth," he said. I lifted mine. "To whatever comes after." We clinked cups, and the sound was small but perfect. Outside, the city exhaled, carrying away what was left of last night's chaos. I watched the snow melt into the gutter, the water running clear. The world had not changed overnight, but something in me had. Later, as I walked home, I passed the Grand Monarch. The lights were off now, the grand windows dark. I paused for a moment, staring at my reflection in the glass, no longer a ghost, just a woman in a coat, breathing. I smiled at her and kept walking. At the corner, my phone buzzed again. A single message from Adam. "The door is open now, do what you came to do." I typed back, "Already am." Then I turned off my phone, tucked it into my pocket, and kept walking into the cold that no longer felt like punishment. For the first time in years, I didn't have a destination, and that was freedom. The morning after everything ended, the city woke up softer. The air outside my window felt different, lighter somehow, as if someone had turned down the volume of the world. I made coffee the slow way, one careful pour at a time, watching the steam rise and dissolve. I hadn't done that in years. Most of my mornings had been spent chasing something, deadlines, meetings, ghosts, but now there was only quiet, and it felt like a language I had forgotten how to speak. I opened my laptop out of habit and saw another wave of articles. Headlines, photos, fragments of my life arranged by strangers. They wrote about the fallen dynasty, about the woman who exposed the lie, about the doctor who betrayed his fiancée to save the truth. It was strange, reading versions of myself that didn't belong to me. I closed the computer. The truth didn't need another audience. Instead, I went outside. The streets were wet, the snow melting into small rivers that carried last night's dust away. I walked with no destination, just breathing in the scent of rain and smoke and bread from the corner bakeries. A street musician played a slow tune on his violin, something gentle and unhurried. I stopped to listen. He smiled without pausing the music. For a moment, that was enough. A melody, a breath, a heartbeat not tangled in anyone else's expectations. By noon, I found myself standing in front of Clara's cup. The bell above the door still chimed the same way it always had. Inside, the world was warm, smelling of sugar and coffee and old wood. Clara was at her usual spot, wiping the counter that didn't need wiping. She looked up and gave me the kind of smile that happens only once every few years. "Back from saving the world." She said, "Just cleaning it up a little," I replied. She poured 2 cups without asking and slid one toward me. "So," she said, "did the truth behave?" I laughed quietly. "It behaved like a wild animal, but it stopped running." She studied me for a while, her eyes sharper than her words. "And you?" "I stopped running too." Clara nodded as if that was the only answer that mattered. For a while, we sat in silence, the hum of the coffee machine filling the space between us. Outside, people passed by without glancing in, their lives moving at their own speeds. "You should do something with what you built," she said suddenly. "I already did." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I mean something for you, not for survival, for living." Her words lingered, for living. It sounded like a door opening to a place I hadn't dared to visit yet. I didn't answer her right away. I finished my coffee and said, "I've been thinking about starting a foundation, something small. A network for people who have been silenced or erased. Give them resources, mentorship, maybe even a place to start again." Clara smirked. "You always did have a soft spot for the broken ones." "They're not broken," I said. "They're just rebuilding." She leaned on the counter. "Then build something that lasts longer than revenge." I smiled. "That's the plan." Before I left, I slipped an envelope onto the counter. Inside was a check, the first donation to the foundation that didn't exist yet. Clara saw it but didn't say a word. She just nodded and went back to cleaning the counter. That was her way of saying she approved. The afternoon stretched out before me like a blank page. I walked to the park, the same one where I used to study under a broken lamp years ago. The trees were bare now, their branches sharp against the pale sky. I sat on a bench and let the wind play with my hair. A few children were throwing snowballs near the fountain, laughing as if the world had never disappointed them. I watched them for a while, smiling without realizing it. I took out my notebook, one I hadn't opened since the early days of Anu. Inside were old scribbles, ideas, half-formed dreams. Between the notes on nutrition formulas and supply chains, there was a line I'd written long ago. "Gentle things can change the world too." I traced the words with my finger. They still felt true. That night, I sat by my window, looking out at the city lights flickering like distant fires. I wrote the first page of my new proposal, the Anu Foundation for Renewal and Recovery, a name born from everything I had learned, everything I had lost, and everything I refused to give up. Noah called while I was writing. "So," he said, "you really can't sit still, can you?" "I'm not rebuilding an empire," I said. "Just a bridge." He laughed. "You always did like impossible projects." "I like meaningful ones better." He paused. "And Adam." I looked out at the skyline, the clouds drifting slow and silver. "He's doing what he said he would, helping with the audit, cleaning up what's left. I think that's enough." "You sound at peace." "Maybe I am." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said softly, "You deserve it, the peace." "I know," I said, and for once I meant it. When I hung up, the clock on my desk read midnight. The same hour I had stood outside the Grand Monarch, watching everything fall apart. Only now it felt like something new was being built in its place, quietly, deliberately, without the need for applause. I opened the window a little and let the cold air in. It smelled like coffee and snow and the faint sweetness of chocolate from Grace's bakery across the street. I whispered into the night, "Thank you." I wasn't sure who I was thanking, the world, Clara, the past, but it didn't matter. Gratitude doesn't need a direction. It just needs space to breathe. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and let the city keep singing outside. Tomorrow would come, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to meet it. Morning light crept across the floorboards like the beginning of a promise. I woke before the alarm again, though this time it wasn't out of habit or restlessness. It was peace. Real peace, the kind that doesn't announce itself but lingers quietly at the edges of everything. I stayed in bed for a few moments, listening to the world breathe outside my window. A bird sang somewhere nearby. The sound felt unfamiliar, like a language I hadn't heard in years. After a while, I got up and made breakfast. Toast, honey, black coffee. Nothing fancy, but it felt ceremonial, a small act of belonging to myself. I ate by the window, watching the street below fill with people rushing to their own lives. None of them knew who I was, and I liked it that way. For the first time, anonymity felt like freedom instead of exile. The foundation papers were spread out on my table, sketches, drafts, and names written in half-faded ink. The anew foundation still sat at the top, circled twice. It wasn't just an idea anymore. Last night, I had received 3 messages from people who wanted to help, former employees, volunteers, a journalist who said she'd offer coverage for free. The world, once so indifferent, was suddenly listening. I spent the rest of the morning answering emails and writing letters of intent. Each word carried something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. Not revenge, not redemption, just direction. Every keystroke felt like placing one more stone in a bridge I hadn't realized I was building. Around noon, my phone buzzed, a message from Adam. Heading to the airport. Board requested I represent the company at the inquiry next week. Thought you should hear it from me. I read it twice, then typed back. "Good, you'll do it right this time." He replied with a single line. "Thanks for believing that I could." I didn't know what else to say. Maybe there wasn't anything left to say. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation, it's the silence that follows it. Later, I walked down to the river. The same one where I'd once torn up my forged certificate and let the wind scatter it. The water was higher now, moving faster, carrying bits of ice and sunlight. I leaned on the railing and breathed in the cold air. Every breath felt earned. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the person I'd been a year ago, angry, uncertain, always standing at the edge of something she couldn't name. I wanted to tell her that the edge wasn't the end. It was the beginning. You don't fall forever. Eventually, you learn how to land. A small group of people were feeding pigeons near the benches. One of them, a little girl in a red coat, kept laughing every time the birds fluttered too close. Her laughter echoed over the water, pure and contagious. I smiled, realizing how easy joy can sound when you stop looking for it in the wrong places. As I turned to leave, I saw a familiar figure walking along the path, Noah. He waved when he noticed me, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Do you ever stop working?" he teased. "I'm on a break," I said, taking one of the cups. "A professional one." He grinned. I've been thinking, if you're starting this foundation, you'll need a website, an outreach plan, maybe even a proper PR strategy. I could help with that. My firm owes me a few favors." "You do that?" "I would," he said simply. "For you," I laughed softly. "You sure you want to get dragged into my crusade for truth?" "It's not a crusade," he said. "It's a second chance. You're good at giving those." For a while, we stood together, sipping coffee and watching the river move. The water glittered under the pale sun, endless and unbothered. Noah broke the silence first. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow," I said. "The foundation's first field visit is in a small coastal town. A clinic there lost its funding because of Robbins Care's old contracts. We're going to rebuild it." He smiled. "You're turning ghosts into blueprints." "Maybe that's all any of us can do," I said. We walked along the riverbank until the light began to dim. The sky shifted from silver to a faint violet, the kind of color that looks like it's remembering something beautiful. People passed us with their own quiet lives, unaware that 2 people were standing there rewriting theirs from the ground up. When we reached the corner where our paths split, Noah stopped. "You're going to be fine, you know." "I already am," I said. "But thank you." He smiled, and for a second I thought he might say something more, but he didn't. He just touched my shoulder lightly and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I stayed for a few moments longer, then turned toward home. The city lights were beginning to glow, one by one, like stars remembering where to shine. That night, I packed my bags for the trip. Simple clothes, my notebook, Clara's old mug. Before closing the suitcase, I added one more thing, a photo from years ago. It was of me standing outside the First Anew office, holding a cardboard sign that said, "Start again anyway." The edges were worn, but the words still glowed faintly under the lamp. When I lay down, I didn't dream of the past. I dreamed of tomorrow, of laughter in small clinics, of people who would never have to erase their names again, of quiet rooms filled with new beginnings. Somewhere in that dream, Clara's voice whispered, "Gentle things can change the world too." And this time, I believed her. When the morning came, I would go. The world wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was wide and open and waiting. And for the first time in my life, so was I.